Hi everyone, and welcome to this live webinar, 2020 and Beyond, 10 Restaurant Cybersecurity Best Practices for Every Concept. I'm QSR Web and Pizza Marketplace Editor Shelley Whitehead. I'm delighted you've joined us today on this critical topic that keeps so many restaurateurs up at night. After all, the rate of technological change is head-spinning, and keeping pace with that in order to secure your customers' data and your brand's reputation is a daunting task. But you are in the absolute right place right now to ensure you've got a rock-solid cybersecurity game plan for 2020 and beyond. Over the next hour, ParTech Corporation Chief Technology Officer Chaz Worster and Inspire Brands Field Tech Services Director Chris Stark will give you the lowdown on the top 10 best practices that every concept can employ to safeguard the brand, its customers, and the trust they place in all restaurant concepts to securely handle their data, even in light of mounting cyber criminal threats. But before we start, just remember that you can enter your questions in that lower left-hand chat box on your screen anytime as we go along, and we'll respond to them after the formal presentation in about a half hour. Don't be shy. This is an opportune time to get your concerns answered by the experts. So with that, I will turn it over to those experts to take you into today's presentation. Chaz?
Hello, everyone. I wanted to go over a little bit of overview on who we are at PAR, and then we'll walk through some of the landscape and some of the tips. And I'm joined here by my colleague Chris from Inspire Brands, who will also be chiming in on some of the tips and going over how Inspire leverages best practices in order to keep their customers and their organization safe as well. So just a little bit of information about PAR Technologies. So you all may know us from either the software or the hardware lines of business in restaurant technology. So we sell point-of-sale hardware under the PAR brand and point-of-sale software primarily under the Brink point-of-sale brand. We were founded in 1968 and are a public company traded on the New York Stock Exchange. You may not be aware that we also operate a government contracting division as well that does mission-critical geospatial and intelligence work for the United States government. And with that, we have experience in some of the cyber best practices, both from the commercial world as well as from the world of government services. As we look at the overall landscape for technology and for data, what we see is an increase in, can you see the slide that says current data landscape? There we go. Sorry for any delays on that. What we see is consumers are using their phones more and more for online transactions and digital ordering. E-commerce and mobile payments are expected to continue to grow. More and more people are using technology in order to procure goods and services. And as that proliferation of technology, as the mechanism through which we're purchasing goods and services continues to increase, what we see is more and more folks taking advantage of that in order to try to disrupt that commerce or steal information or credit cards or be able to commit crimes and get into your wallet or your customers' wallets through the technology that they're using in order to make their lives simpler. And so we would all like for the transactions to be as seamless as possible, for all of our systems to make everything about the way that we do business more efficient. That's why we invest in technology, in order to run our businesses. But at the same time, as we're making those technology investments, we also need to make sure that those investments don't become the way that bad actors get into our systems and disrupt our businesses overall. And so, as we look at more of the threats in the environment that we see that breaches show up on the news quite a bit. And right now, the average breach costs about $4 million to be remediated. So, and an average breach would impact roughly 25,000 customers' records at an average cost of $148 per impacted record. Right? And so in 2019 alone, there have been large-scale data breaches at quick service restaurants, at food delivery services. We can see that within the last couple months. Table service restaurants, credit card processors. We've seen large-scale breaches of major internet service providers. We've seen large-scale breaches of hotel chains information. And with that, we see the frightening statistic that 44% of Americans say they've been a victim of a security breach. So they've had their personal information or their credit card information obtained by someone who had hacked into a system. And what we're looking to do is provide some tips and best practices around how to avoid that, right? Hey, how do we reduce the risk that your organization will be the victim of a cybercrime, right? Will be hacked or attacked. And so some of the basics, right, that we're looking to go do are to go monitor so that we would be able to tell that it occurred, right? And what you would need to be able to do is protect the customer data, right? It is sometimes more expensive, but it is necessary in order to make sure that you don't have a data breach. And it's part of using technology safely in order to improve your business operations. And so as we proceed through the rest of the tips, we'll go over different aspects that you can concentrate on to identify and mitigate risk points and decrease the likelihood that you would be a victim of a cyber attack or an actual breach. Because these breaches have real monetary impact, both in terms of the cost to remediate as well as to brand, right? That no one wants their brand associated immediately with a data breach or with some other negative connotation. With that in mind, the number one tip, and this is true both at your home as well as at your business, is keep everything up to date, right? Keep an eye out for security patches. Make sure that you are keeping your systems well patched. In general, at least once a month you should be performing the updates. For critical updates, you should get those out immediately. For updates that are non-critical, you should test them first if you can, right? So sometimes it is not to your advantage to have the very bleeding edge of a patch from your vendor, from Microsoft. If at all possible, test it first in one of your stores, one of your restaurants, in order to make sure that everything works properly. But be sure to keep up to date on the security patches, absolutely. Another thing to watch out for is the end of life of different systems that you run on. So whether it's the end of life of Microsoft systems, Windows, or the end of life on a particular version of Android or iOS, when the end of life occurs, those companies, the companies that provide the operating system, no longer provide the security patches. And so you will be at risk if you don't keep your operating systems up to date and on a currently supported version. And so just for everyone's information, currently Windows 7 and Windows Server 8 are set for an end of life in 2020. The Windows 7, there's some embedded versions that have later dates, but check with the supplier of your systems to make sure that you are keeping up to date and that you do not end up in a situation where the operating system has gone out of support and there's no longer security patches available.
Yeah, Chaz, from Arby's perspective, tip number one is one of the biggest areas of focus for us. You know, it's creating a patch deployment strategy. Like you said, make sure that we're updating everything monthly, make sure we're doing the proper QA. We also are employing a change management process so that we can track all these independent changes. That way we can assess the risk, make sure that we're mitigating a rollback strategy if required. And we also have other stakeholders in the organization up to speed as far as what's being deployed to our restaurants.
That's absolutely. And internal to PAR, we have the strategy for making sure that our server infrastructure, right? Because we provide the Brink point-of-sale cloud-based system to our customers, we make sure that our server infrastructure is up to date and on the latest versions of the operating system, and that our servers are being patched. And we would recommend that everyone make sure that your vendors are also using good policies and practices to make sure that everything is up to date and secure. The second tip reduces quite a bit of risk around losing credit card data and credit card information, and that is to leverage semi-integrated payment devices. So the semi-integrated payment devices maintain a separation between the point-of-sale system and the communication of the credit card information. And so that makes it quite a bit harder for a bad actor to break in and try to steal the credit card information from the point-of-sale system, because the point-of-sale system won't have access to the actual credit card numbers. And so there's a number of other advantages of using semi-integrated payment systems, including that the certifications around PCI become quite a bit less complicated. The EMV certifications go away because they're already completed by the processor in most cases. Again, you end up with a reduced scope on your PCI because no credit card information ends up being sent to the POS application, right? Just tokens and cryptographic hashes end up moving through the system, and those are significantly less valuable than actual credit card information. It also ends up with the customer being able to perform the entire transaction without having to hand the card to anybody, right? And so that's an advantage as well from a security point of view. And most of those devices have numerous connectivity methods in order to get the information back to the payment processor over TCP/IP, either wired or wireless, serial, USB. Lots of different methods and mechanisms to go do that. Some processors also offer P2P encryption over the top for additional security. And I can't stress enough how much this reduces your risk, that this really is a relatively straightforward, although not free, way to go reduce the risk in your operating restaurants.
And Chaz, from Arby's perspective, I'll jump in here as well. Just have to note that your tips are pretty good. You're stealing my thunder from my slide, but you know I'm glad I can go in and talk about this. Tip number 2 for Arby's was not a nice to have, it was a must have. It was something that we had to do to secure our payment platform. We need to make sure that we protected the customer's credit card data. You know, we looked at our legacy platform. We understood that it had some limitations and challenges for the secure payment platform that it recommended. And then we kind of evaluated the ParBrink solution. And with your integration to the key players back in 2017, it was an easy choice. And what we've noticed, unlike many in the industry, is our implementation of the Verifone platform was seamless, and we owe that a lot to the integrations that your team built for that platform. So thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So on to tip 3. So adjacent to the first tip, right? You should maintain separate networks for your critical systems, right? So for sure, your point of sale system should not be on the same network as your guest Wi-Fi, right? Under no circumstances should you be letting guests onto the same network that you use to process payments or process point-of-sale transactions, right? That it is very much preferred that you have a separate network for that. There's lots of ISPs that will help you go do that and set that up to make sure that you have that all in place. The other reason you want to do that is because you also want to reserve the bandwidth, right? That hey, you don't want either your own employees or your guests at your restaurant using up the entirety of your internet backhaul to play Fortnite or watch videos, and then make all the rest of your critical systems that need the internet in order to process payment transactions or accept online orders. You do not want to have your network throttled by those kinds of traffic, right? So absolutely maintain a separate guest network. Absolutely put in place prioritization and traffic shaping to make sure that your critical systems get access to the network backhaul above people playing games or watching movies, right, on your systems. Additionally, on behalf of your guests, you should also make sure that if you're offering a guest Wi-Fi network, that you turn on wireless isolation. And so that prevents one of your guests from sniffing the network traffic inside the restaurant. Absolutely, the big three here are a completely separate network, traffic shaping and prioritization of your own internal critical systems, and wireless network isolation so that no one can do packet sniffing on your internal networks. Number 4 is also a big deal, right? Hey, you should hire the right people. So Inspire Brands does that. They hire experts to go make sure that their systems are secure. And you should have people on staff or who you contract out to that are experts in cybersecurity, ideally with some expertise in PCI. There's other privacy issues too that can often be bundled up in these hires that are not necessarily cybersecurity, but that are very important, right? So privacy information, how you're storing PII, whether or not you're compliant with the new California privacy laws, if you do business in Europe, whether you're compliant with GDPR, so the ability to inform customers of what marketing information you have about them and allow them to ask you to purge it. These are all things that are adjacent to cybersecurity, but that are also very important, and that having the right folks on staff is critical to having these good policies and procedures in place.
Yeah, so we actually expanded on tip number 4, right? So we have a CISO that has been added to the roster here at Arby's, Inspire Brands. We've also kind of bolstered our security team. But what we also do is we bring in independent contractors that will do penetration testing for any new initiative or new product that we're implementing to our restaurants.
Absolutely. And actually we have on the line with me, in case anyone asks a difficult question later, Harris Wiseman, who's PAR's Director of Cybersecurity. And we also internally use 2 different firms to do penetration and other tests of the system, acting as bad actors to try to get in. And we'll dig into that a little bit more as we go through some of the rest of the tips. On tip number 5, just like hiring good folks, you need to train them as well, right? It's your own employees that end up as the first line of defense and can quickly recognize when things are going wrong, right? Hey, is there something behaving unusually in the restaurant? Does the system look like it's been compromised? Does the register itself appear to be behaving unusually? And working through different training mechanisms to make sure that everyone is up to speed on what they should be looking for, what things are unusual, so that they can raise their hand and notify you of something that's amiss or something that doesn't look right. And so those training policies and procedures, you can hire those out to third parties. There's plenty of literature out there, and if you want suggestions on different firms that have good training programs that you can have your employees go use as part of your standard employee onboarding or as part of ongoing HR training, please, you can reach out to us. You can reach out to whoever your point of sale vendor is. I'm sure that they will have some suggestions on the tools that they use to train their own employees.
Yeah, this is probably where Arby's can do a little bit better, right, from training the restaurant employees. I know that the corporate employees go through certification or evaluation each year for your basics, but I would like to see that actually implemented at the restaurant level.
Yeah, absolutely, because those are folks that could identify that something that was acting unusually and raise the red flag a little bit faster. So, speaking of raising the red flag a little bit faster, tip number 6 is that you should have a plan ready just in case, right? So, if you have an event where someone gets into your system or breaches, if you don't already know what you're planning to do, then it will take longer to respond. And every hour that it takes to respond potentially allows more data, more information, more bad things to happen to you and to your organization. And so having a playbook ready and handy that can be referred to in the event that you have one of the likely problems, right? Hey, did someone get into your email system? Did someone breach one of the restaurants, right? Knowing what it is that you're going to do before it occurs helps a lot with being able to respond quickly.
Yeah, I know there are a lot of third-party organizations out there that can come in and assess and kind of help create this kind of communication plan if you are in a breach-related incident. But it's very important what you communicate, when you communicate, how you actually remediate the problems, and what organizations you bring in to assist you. So having a plan, sticking to the plan is very important.
And if you're looking to tie it into something else so that it gets refreshed periodically, many companies have disaster recovery plans or business continuity plans. Just tying your cyber incident response plan to that same cadence is a good idea. And if you don't happen to have a business continuity or a disaster recovery plan in the event of a catastrophe, you should probably do that also and then tie your cybersecurity update plans to that same cadence. So tip number 7 is handling your data well, right? There's a number of locations that you have that are going to have critical information. And you might be surprised to learn that your email servers, not your point-of-sale system, are often the systems that get targeted, right? That, hey, depending on how you process payroll, you may be emailing information to ADP or whoever it is that's doing your payroll, and that securing your email servers is a really good way to also try to protect yourself, right? File servers that you have local to the corporation as well. Ensuring that those systems are secure goes a long way to making sure that your organization will be safe in cybersecurity incidents. If at all possible, do not store social security numbers, and certainly do not use them as the employee ID in ways that get passed around between your different integration partners, right? If you use a social security number as the employee ID, you will accidentally share it to any party that is using the employee ID, and those can often be accessed via API, right? So you would expose social security numbers through a number of your third parties if you do that. So please do not use your social security numbers as employee IDs, and hold that information encrypted all the time, right? All the time.
This is another benefit of bringing in a qualified QSR or outside specialist. they'll help you quickly identify the gaps in your systems, and then you'll be able to go and remediate those. For example, using Social Security numbers as employee ID, that was common practice multiple years ago. That is non-existent in the Arby's world.
Absolutely. Other good things you can do in order to, as best practices to secure your email servers and file servers are, hey, if you have, no matter how your infrastructure is set up, use a firewall, right? Have a firewall in place, have it configured, have it be as restrictive as possible. And keep an eye on what your backup policies are for email and file servers, right? That same information that's on your email or file servers, once it's backed up and sent somewhere else, you now have a copy of that somewhere else that is just as vulnerable as it was when it was on the file server. So speaking of all of that, in order to be able to log into any of these systems, in general, you need authentication, right? You have to present the information that says who it is that you are, so that you can be verified and authenticated. You should have the system set to be as restrictive as possible. You should not give admin rights to anybody that does not need admin privileges. And everyone should have complex passwords, right? In general, longer phrases are typically more difficult to crack. Random generated passwords, in fact, are better. You can leverage password vaults to hold them, although make sure you choose a reputable password vault so that they don't get hacked and cause an issue for you. In general, you should not write it and not allow any of your employees to write it on a Post-it note and set it on the terminal or on their computer. Right? These things seem basic, but these things happen. Right? These things happen. So there are ways to set all of the systems that you use day to day to require a certain level of complexity in the way the passwords are set up, and you should make sure that your vendors are doing that, right? Requiring you to use a mix of letters and numbers, requiring a certain length. You should set those same systems so that you can't reuse passwords, right? You shouldn't be able to reuse them, and they should, although there is some debate on the frequency of changing passwords, you should be rotating them periodically. You should also be monitoring your authentication logs and looking for things that are anomalous. If you don't have any locations in Eastern Europe or Russia or in North Korea, you should not expect people to be logging into any of your systems from those ranges of IP addresses. And so you should be monitoring for that and ideally blocking all of those things. The best practice right now is also to use multi-factor authentication. So either physical tokens that have the rotating numbers on them, biometric information, mobile applications that are tied to the phone number are better than SMS, but SMS is better than not using multi-factor authentication. If you do choose to use biometrics, you must keep track of what the laws are in some states and what the restrictions are around notifying people that you are using biometric information, and on what the requirements are to destroy that information after the fact. Right? So biometrics are a great way to do multi-factor authentication, but you must make sure that you're complying with local law.
And from Orby's perspective, we were early adopters with biometrics on the point of sale, and I think that we've seen a vast improvement with the technology as we moved on to a new platform. So we're pleased with that. I think we still have some work to do as far as making sure we rotate our passwords on our point of sale and kitchen devices on a strict 90-day cycle. We're looking at different password management tools that could be leveraged in our mixed domain workgroup environment. So we do have some challenges, but we're looking to get those taken care of.
Absolutely. And so once you've secured the authentication so that people can't get into your systems without the proper authentication, you should also be using encryption, right? So all the data at rest should be encrypted so that it is only accessible with a valid authentication, like from tip 8, right? So in general, everything should be encrypted at rest. The most So this is not just your point of sale systems, this is your corporate laptops, right? Everything anybody's using to be able to access email, to be able to do transactions, to be able to log into the back office, to be able to use the web browser and see your data up in the cloud, whatever it is that you're using it for. All of your systems should have whole disk encryption turned on as a best practice, right? You should also be using encryption in transit, right? So you should be using, you shouldn't be using FTP, right? There's secure ways to go transmit files back and forth. You should make sure that those encryption mechanisms are up to date, right? That you're on the latest version of TLS, and that you have you should have a documented minimum standard for what the security is that you're willing to use for encryption as you're on transit. And you should keep in mind that if you, as most organizations do, allow people to use their mobile phones to get access to their email or to move files around, that those mobile devices are also a way for bad actors to get into the system, right? And that there's many of the online systems, so Google's Office Suite, Office 365, have different ways to do a remote wipe of your corporate data from mobile phones. And in larger organizations, having a full MDM, a mobile device management platform, is likely a good idea. But that anything that you should not ignore the mobile devices, right? Anything that can download information, download emails, download attachments, you're advantaged in having a way to be able to go clear those things out, either because because you're worried about a breach, or because the employee has left your company, right? Making sure that as you have all of these things set up, particular authentication and everything else, if your systems are all individual, when someone quits your organization, you have to terminate their access to all their point-of-sale logins, all of their corporate logins for email, anything that they have to get into file systems or Dropbox or any of the Slack, anything where you have your own username and password. When your employee leaves, you need to make sure that you also remove all of their usernames and passwords from all of those systems as a practice. And then the last one is tip number 10. Don't forget about traditional security. Make sure that you shred or properly dispose of all paper materials that have sensitive information on them. Right? If you have pieces of paper that have folks' credit card information written down while someone was getting ready to type it into a portal, if you have information about your employees, forms that they've filled out, it either has to be properly secured or should be destroyed, right? You should have surveillance programs in place, so cameras, locks, biometrics on the physical side, just as you do on the cyber side, using firewalls and other software tools to detect breaches and attempts at breach. You should have those same things on your physical buildings, right? Both the restaurants and your corporate offices, to make sure that people are badging in and out, and that in the event of a theft, that you would be able to identify and work with the police to recover, right? For equipment that holds servers, those sorts of things that hold critical information, it is often a good idea to physically secure them to a rack, to have them to use cable ties to lock them to the desks, so that people can't just come and physically steal your equipment. And make sure that your customers and your employees aren't walking out with things, aren't walking out with the point of sale terminals, aren't leaving with the cash drawer, right? So,
and from the Arby's perspective, we're moving away from paper. Everything's going to be digital. We're going to be digitally signing onboarding materials for new employees. We've already got a program in place with surveillance cameras. There's talk about integrating that to the POS in the future, so that way you can tie transactions to video. We're pretty good at securing the physical buildings. So we definitely have a plan in place here. It's consistent with tip number 10.
Perfect. And then sorry for stealing some of your thunder on some of the other tips, but here's the open forum on how you guys over at Inspire Brands do some additional items.
So as stated, my name is Chris Dark. I'm Director of the Field Services team for the Arby's brand under the Inspire Brands umbrella. My focus today is really looking at the restaurant level and how security can be implemented to a restaurant or a retail store. I think the first thing you really need to do is kind of evaluate your restaurant architecture. You've got to be honest with yourself and identify aging equipment or any software or any platforms that have potential risks. You know, we're talking about network gear, point of sale, kitchen hardware, manager workstations, any software that's on any of those devices, you know, including the POS. And as I stated in tip number 4, you can get this evaluation done either through your PCI audit, your QSR, who will be more than forthright to give you as much information about where you are vulnerable, or you can bring in independent consultants who will go through penetration testing and then provide you a detailed report of the gaps that you need to remediate. You know, and once you actually identify and assess those gaps, the real work comes in plugging those gaps, putting a plan in place to actually resolve the issues that are outlined. And some of the things that Arby's has focused on is, you know, hardening the OS level configurations of all our PCs, right? Whether it's point of sale or kitchen or manager workstations, you know, we've actually applied the CIS critical security controls. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with that, but that's a 1,200-page document with the best practices for securing PCs equipment. Now, luckily, we do have an automation tool that will go through and automatically place all our required settings intact. And then you need to just go through and test and validate with your QA teams to make sure that all your software performs all its functions as it should. And then if you do have to roll back any of these settings, you can then have compensating controls. And it just, at the end of the day, these settings and these best practices will make you feel more secure in your environment. And then, as I was talking about earlier, developing a patch management, you know, program or schedule. You want to make sure that you're aligned with whoever your operating system provider is and your security team. I think that my team has become more closely knit with security, knowing that we can be very proactive. We can work early with them to make sure that we're doing things in the right way. And then the next thing is to be involved or participate in your organization's change control program, right? That way it has multiple benefits. You can determine the risk of your deployments, whether it's a Windows hotfix or a software patch for a product. You can document all those changes so that everybody is clear, has a clear understanding of what was done, when it was done, who did it, and then you can coordinate these efforts with all the other stakeholders that are responsible for your deployments within the restaurant. Secondly, I believe you've got to remain current with industry standards, that new technology and security trends. And I give you an example. Our journey started with selecting a new point-of-sale platform back in 2015. We took a lot of time, extensive RFI and RFPs. I think we came up, and Chaz, you'll probably remember this, it was about 1,000 technical requirements for our future platform. Right, so we were actually starting well in advance of when we knew we wanted to move. So that way we would be able to vet out and select the best provider for us at that moment. And then luckily that we had all this pre-work done. There was an immediate need to move away from our legacy point-of-sale system and implement a new system with a secure payment platform. We were able to do that implementation of 1,200 restaurants in 6 months. All right, so the due diligence, the time and effort that we spent evaluating, I would say, paid off dramatically for our organization. And then kind of piggybacking on that, one of the most important parts of selecting the ParTech solution was its ability to quickly integrate with a secure payment platform. Right, we were able to very quickly, in a 6-month time frame, secure our credit card data for the guests, and that was, providing us tokenization, the encryption on a segmented cardholder data network. So it was definitely a whirlwind experience, that project. And lastly, I would say, as we move to secure the restaurants, the tips 7, 8, 9, and 10, I mean, these are all extremely valuable things, right? What we're looking at now is making sure that in our restaurant environment, we're limiting administrative access to just the applications that require it, right? So we're kind of making sure we reduce the credentials throughout the restaurant. We're looking at the automation of changing the passwords on these unattended devices, the point of sale register and kitchen controllers on a more scheduled basis. I think that, with going with the right solution, working with your security team, locking down the settings, hardening the environment, making it more difficult for bad actors to manipulate your environment will set you in a position of success.
Absolutely. And so as we come to, I think, the last slide with any content on it, Chris already covered most of this, right? That, hey, revisit these items periodically and stay updated, right? Keep an eye out for new issues and laws and new cybersecurity programs. Learn from your mistakes. And as you're looking at new vendors, right, make sure that it's in the RFP, right? Make sure that security is front and center as you're picking a new partner if they're going to handle any kind of sensitive information. And you can always ask for their SOC 2 compliance report, right? So that's an industry standard or an industry standard report that describes how well you're implementing your cybersecurity practices. So it's a good thing to ask your vendors for, right? It shows that they're serious about it. And at this point, I think we're on to the question slide.
Yes, sir. That was tremendous information. Thanks, Chaz and Chris. And now let's get to some of our audience's questions. And if you haven't typed yours in yet, please do so now so we can get them queued up and answered before we have to leave today. So the first question we have comes to us and says, as payment methods change and new forms are accepted, what do you suggest companies do to mitigate the risk?
So I think number one, it's choosing the right partner, right? There are several options out there in the secure payments field. I think each of the vendors have their strong points. And I think as the industry expands the payment types, choosing the right vendor will actually move the needle quicker in developing those payment types so that your business can accept them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Moving on down the list here. And you've covered some of these, but what are some of the simple things people forget about when it comes to security that often leave them vulnerable?
Well, I've heard from other industry experts that one of the biggest things at the restaurant level is not patching, right? Not applying Windows hotfixes or updates for major security threats.
Yeah, and if you don't have the password policy in place that keeps people from using password as their password, those sorts of things are also easy to do and necessary, right? It seems like everyone should know you shouldn't use password as your password, but there's always a surprising number of those when someone gets a breach reported and there's a review of what the actual passwords were. So.
Right to know. And this next question is one that I'm kind of wondering about. And that is to ask, how often should employees be trained in new security threats?
At PAR, we do it annually. It's part of we have a number of different training programs that are on an annual clock, and so that's one of them. So we do new training annually, and as part of that training, we also do phishing training. So identifying, in particular, emails that are designed to trick you into clicking on something and providing your credentials. And so that is one of the important sets of training that you should be doing, right? You should also have your systems tightened up to try to remove all of that as spam or as security problematic emails. But it's phishing training and general training we do annually.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say same along the lines from Arby's corporate employees or Inspire employees. It's on the annual clock.
Great. So it's a yearly thing. This is an interesting question. When you're assessing a new POS solution, how can you evaluate the security systems each vendor has in place?
So I'll take the first stab at it, Chaz, and then you can follow up. I think from a customer standpoint, if you're in a lab evaluation type scenario and you've got multiple vendors that you're looking at, bringing in a third party to do some simple penetration testing is probably the easiest thing to do to kind of get a level set across platforms to see which one has the least amount of gaps and is a better fit. I think it's become standard practice at Arby's to include penetration testing for all projects. So if you're familiar with building out, your budgets for the following year for projects, it's just a line item. You can do some research locally, find out what organizations are near your headquarters that you feel comfortable with, and put that budgeted line item in, and just make sure that you have it there so that you can get the results.
Yeah, I agree. That and making sure you ask some questions in your RFP about, hey, what sorts of certifications or third-party reports you can get from your point-of-sale vendor as well. I think that also helps, but double checking it and running your own penetration test in the lab is brilliant, right? That is a great way to make sure that things are going well. But I would also ask for their I'd pull their PCI reports. I'd ask for their SOC reports, and ask for what their best practices are, so you can hold them to it.
Tremendous information. So, moving on down here, and please, folks, we just have about 10 minutes left here, so if you have a question, don't hold back. Just type it in. I won't say your name. But the next question is, what do you suggest people do to establish a disaster recovery plan, and how often should you revise it? Yeah.
So one thought exercise that gets used in disaster planning is actually imagine a disaster, right? Hey, if your data center or your main corporate building were struck by a meteor and were destroyed, what would happen to all of your restaurants, right? What would happen to your ability to do business? How long would it take you to get back up and running? Is kind of the carte blanche answer to, hey, how do you figure out if you have a reasonable disaster recovery plan, right? And how often you should revisit it. Those often get stale, right? Because the exercise is so much just an imagination that they often don't get revised. At the very least, you should revise it anytime you change a critical system, right? Because the way you would respond will be different if you have a different critical system. If you switch how you're doing your email, right? If you change who your point-of-sale providers, if you move to a different back office, if you switch out who you're using for CRM, right? If you make a wholesale change to the way that you're operating the business, you should revise the disaster plan. Otherwise, best practice would be to update it every year. Honestly, most folks probably only hit it every 3 years or so. But if you're changing a really big system, you should revisit your disaster recovery.
Yeah, and from the Arby's restaurant perspective, as long as Chaz is doing exactly what he said, I feel very comfortable. I know that the solution is across multiple servers, so if one system goes down, our point of sale will still be operational. But I think from the corporate perspective, that really is more of an executive leadership and communications department. They make sure that they go out to a third party, make sure the plan's in place. They consult with the different stakeholders in the organization so everybody's on the same page.
Okay, Chris, we're going to stay with you for a second because this question is directed at Inspire Brands. It's asked, with threats constantly emerging, what is Inspire Brands doing to prevent vulnerabilities in the system, aside from what you've already talked about today?
Sure. I'd like to refer back to the entire presentation, specifically tips 1, 2, 3, and 4. I think the biggest thing we've done is securing the payments, right? We're securing full PAN data of the card. We're ensuring it's segmented on its own network. It's isolated from all other point of sale and guest Wi-Fi. I think the things we're doing with hardening the OS on all the device levels, I would say we're going above and beyond where we need to be from a PCI compliance standpoint due to the fact that we have limited scope. But we understand it's even if you are breached and no credit card data is obtained, it's still against the company's reputation. So every day we're vigilant about making sure we're keeping updated from any kind of patch or fix. We're just, the work is never done.
Wow, and if the public only knew how much work goes into this, it's mind-boggling to listen to you all talk about the efforts that are taken. So I'll move on here, and this is going to be our last question, unless somebody is holding back and wants to put it in another question in real quick. So the question asks, what advice do you have for companies that have been hit by a data breach? Is there an easy way to recover?
No, right? There's not an easy way to recover, which is why they're relatively expensive once they happen, right? There are some basic steps that you should follow, right? And that one of the earlier tips was, hey, have your plan ready, right? The very first thing you should do if you've been hit by a data breach is make sure that it is not still happening, right? So, hey, if you notice that you've been breached, make sure that it stops, right? So stop the breach immediately. In general, the next step is to determine the scope, right? So you need to understand what the scope of the breach is. Did you lose information about customers? Did you lose information about employees? Did you lose payment information? Did you lose social security numbers, right? What set of information is the information that was potentially breached, right? And depending on what that scope is, what that set is, review the law in the different jurisdictions that you operate in, and review what your disclosure obligations are to your partners and customers, right? So you may have disclosure obligations to your franchisees. We at PAR would have disclosure obligations to all of our customers in the event that customer data was lost. And you should err on the side of being generous to people who are impacted, right? If you're not required by law to offer credit monitoring in the event that you lost someone's social security and PII information, you should still offer credit monitoring, right? That these things are both a security problem as well as a PR problem. And so anything that you can do to show that you're taking it seriously and that you're doing right by whoever it is that is being impacted by the issue that you have helped cause, right, goes a long way to establishing that brand promise that you're a good brand to go work with. And so I would say that those three things are what you should be doing immediately. The fourth is also do your root cause analysis, find out what happened, and then tighten up your systems. Go back and revisit your security policies and procedure and look at all adjacencies, right? So, hey, if someone got into system A and you're going to go harden down System A to make sure that no one ever gets into System A again, you should look at all of the neighboring systems, right? You don't want to have it happen a second time to a neighboring system, right? If someone got into your email servers because of X, right, you should make sure that X is not also a way to get into your file servers or your point of sale partner or your loyalty provider or into your payments implementation. So that's what I would say. But honestly, there's not an easy answer to what happens once you've gotten breached. The best practice is to try to prevent the breaches in the first place.
Well said, Chaz. I agree.
Yeah.
Short but sweet there. I would like to thank really all of today's participants for some great questions, and PAR Technologies, Chaz Forster, and Inspire Brands, Chris Stark, for some really in-depth and key information. Now for our audience, please watch your inbox for an email with a link to the on-demand version of the webinar that's coming your way so you can download it and watch it whenever you'd like. Until then, here's wishing you a great day.